Hi everybody, I'm Paul from feastonadventure.com. I wrote a cookbook about making non-perishable meals from freeze-dried, dehydrated, and instant foods for camping, hiking, skiing, climbing, or anywhere that refrigeration is an issue. Today I'm filming from my home kitchen where I'm going to walk you through using and making fermented lemon. This here is my fermented lemon. It's something that's really difficult to find in grocery stores, so it's generally something that we're going to have to make ourselves. It comes to us from the Moroccan tradition, where it finds itself as a feature in dishes like tagine and other savory things. For me at home, I use it a lot when I'm making things like mashed potatoes or rice, where I want to give a nice lemony punch, but I don't want it to be too sour. It's particularly good for making like a buttermilk style mashed potato if you're dairy free or vegan. But for the purposes of today, what I want to do is take us through the whole process of making fermented lemon, dehydrating fermented lemon, and turning it into a powder that we can use in our backcountry recipes. In our backcountry recipes, it's really good for use, again, in things like mashed potatoes and rice where we want to add a lemony flavor. It's also really good if you do any fishing, as we can use it in the preparation of breadings or seasonings to flavor that fish really well. Fermented lemon is traditionally a Moroccan product and would be featured in dishes like tagines, where it pairs really nice with rice or couscous or chicken. It generally takes about 3 to 4 weeks of fermentation before it's ready for use, but it can be kept in the fridge for, well, this has probably been in the fridge for 1.5 years. So yeah, we can keep it for a long time and use it regularly. So why would we use fermented lemon? For our backcountry recipes, I really like the fermented lemon in that we can use it to provide a really strong lemon flavor in dishes where we want it without going too sour. It's not really a great replacement for citric acid because citric acid gives us a much better punch of sour when that's what we're looking for. But fermented lemon gives us a really nice fruity lemon flavor in the dishes that we put it in for. The downside to fermented lemon is that it's very salty. So when we are using fermented lemon in our backcountry recipes, we need to adjust our salt content. We also need to be aware of it in our conventional recipes as well, where that fermented lemon is going to add quite a salty component to whatever dish we're making. Okay, so here's what we're going to need to get started. We're going to need lemons. I got 6 lemons today for us to work with. The other thing we're going to need is salt. The salt that we use is particularly important. We want to make sure that we're using a salt that is not iodized because we don't want to add additional chemicals to our mix that could slow down or prevent the fermentation from happening. I've got here just some coarse canning salt packaged by Sifto, and it is just salt. That's all it says is the ingredients. On top of that, what we need is a container to house it in for the fermentation process. I have 2 that I'm going to use today. One is your standard canning jar that any of you would be able to find quite easily, probably at a grocery store or hardware store. And the other one that I have is a picklet jar. Now this is a hermetically sealed jar that has a rubber gasket in the top and then has an airlock that fits into that rubber gasket. This is actually really important, and we're going to have to figure out a way that we can do that for our standard jar as well. Because what's going to happen during the fermentation process is the lactobacilli, the bacteria that actually do the fermentation for us, so they're going to create a bunch of waste products. One of those waste products is lactic acid, which is one of the things that we really want to have come out of this fermentation process in the flavoring of our fermented lemon. The other thing that's going to come out is a bunch of gases that build up in the jar. If we were just to seal the jar, there's a small risk that the jar could explode, but there's a bigger risk that the pressure of those gases will build up in the jar and ultimately eject all of the stuff from our jar, making a huge mess everywhere. With this picklet jar, the airlock is going to keep any air or oxygen from getting inside our fermentation process and causing it to disrupt, but it's also going to allow any gases that build up in the jar to escape quite easily. For these canning jars, what I'm going to recommend is a nitrile or rubber glove. And basically what we're going to do is we're just going to slip it on there tight. That's going to cause the glove to fill up with gases when they're created. And when the pressure gets too much, it should just release around this collar here and escape easily without causing any kind of explosion. Okay, so without further ado, here we go. The first thing I'm going to do, and frankly, I'm not going to do a lot of measuring here because it doesn't matter terribly too much. But I'm going to create a layer of salt at the bottom of each jar. I'm going to put them to the side. I'm going to cut all my lemons in half. I should note about these lemons, we want to make sure that the sticker's not on them. I mean, we don't want to ferment the sticker label, so that's pretty much all we need to do with them. Maybe not a terrible idea to clean the lemons beforehand, but it's not necessary. Depending on your jar, you might need to quarter your lemons. I think I'm probably going to need to quarter the lemons to start in the 1 liter jar I have, but I'm confident that the lemons will fit in their halves inside the picklet container. Okay, so once we've done that, basically we're just going to take our lemons. Oh, my hand does not fit in there. I'm going to grab tongs. We want to take our lemons and make sure that the fleshy side is what's in the salt. Apparently easier said than done. Okay, I'm going to do that with the pickle jar as well. And I will do some halves in here just so that I can fill up the space. And now, basically what we need to do is we need to start covering everything with salt. Now that we're this far, I'm going to grab my muddler, and I'm going to use the muddler to start squeezing down the lemons, getting a lot of that lemon juice out, mixing into the salt. Ideally, we want all of the lemon rind to be under the now very salty juices, or close to. And if we want, we can add some water, which I may end up doing here. But if we do add water, we want to add distilled water. Or alternatively, water that you've left out to sit, so that most of the chlorine and or fluoride evaporates from it, so that it doesn't become part of the process. So then I'm just going to close up this picklet, and I'm going to put the airlock on. And the airlock needs a little bit of water too. The picklet, if you do get them, or any jar that you can get that has the airlock will have a line in it that you need to add water up to, and that finishes the seal on the lock. That prevents the air from flowing through, but allows the gases to come out. For this guy, like I said, what we're going to do is we're going to do the nitrile glove over top. And now we're just going to let those sit out in the cupboard or on the counter or something to that effect for 3 to 4 weeks before they are at the same stage as our fermented lemons here. And that's making fermented lemons. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to prepare our fermented lemons for dehydration. When we're working with fermented lemons, they're going to come out like this. They're a little slimy, and in general, the flesh is not what we want to use in our dishes. The rind is what we're looking for. So I'm just going to peel the flesh out of this guy. Actually, just going to grab a bowl here that I can put all of that into. And then what we're going to do is just cut some strips off the rind. And they'll be just like that. So I'm going to do a bunch of those now. So now, having done about half that jar, I'm going to get these set up on the tray for dehydration. And that's a pretty simple process. We just want to get it on the tray and not have them. That should do pretty good. And next, I want to try something that I've never done before, which is actually dehydrating out this flesh and powderizing it and seeing what difference it makes in the finished product comparatively. So I'm just going to get it out on a jelly tray here. And I'm making sure to get all the seeds out because I don't really want those in my finished product. And they'll be hard to get out once it's dehydrated, and they'll get powdered up pretty good in the Vitamix. Okay. And now we should have the simple process of just putting our trays in the dehydrator. Now this is basically a fruit, so I'm going to set it to 125, and I'm going to turn it on for like 12 hours. 12 hours has passed and our fermented lemon rind is fully dry now, but in the meantime we're going to put this into the blender and pulverize it into a powder. A blender is going to do a really good job of pulverizing this into a powder. Really, any blender will do. A food processor would work as well. If you're using a food processor or a blender that has a pulse option, pulsing is the first thing that you should start with. That's going to break this down into more manageable pieces that can be easily turned into a powder by the blender once you turn it up to high speed. If you have something like a Vitamix, like I'm using here, I'm going to start by cutting it up at a fairly low speed, running it at 1 for a couple seconds, and then bringing it up to 10, and then finally putting on the power boost to get it to finished pulverized powder. Here we go. And now that that's done, I'm going to decant this into a little freezer jar. And that's basically our finished product there. One thing I will say about the fermented lemon powder is that it'll probably last about 6 months. It does definitely lose some potency of flavor over time, so that's probably about as long as it's going to stay good. I usually keep this in the freezer, and even then, over time, it loses its potency. So, yeah, plan for about 6 months with your fermented lemon. And if you'd like to learn more about fermentation, I highly recommend the seminal book by Sandor Katz, The Art of Fermentation. I will have a link to that below in the description of this video. Hey, thanks for watching. Please feel free to subscribe to my channel if you'd like to learn more about Just Add Water cooking. Apparently there's some value you can click if you want to be notified when I post something new. I've never clicked it, but go ahead if that's your thing. To find out where I source some of the more unusual ingredients in my recipes, go to my website, feastonadventure.com. And while you're at it, consider buying my book, Feast on Adventure. It has over 40 recipes designed for camping, hiking, skiing, climbing, or anywhere that refrigeration is an issue. It also teaches you everything you need to know about freeze-dried, dehydrated, and instant ingredients, and provides a framework for turning your family favorites into just add water meals.